Stomping upstairs. Hi, Cam followers. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Nikki, and this evening we have Mike Farrell. I was about to introduce him with big lots of names, and we just said, no, we're just Mike tonight. We're just going to be Mike and Nikki. So thanks for joining us, everyone. We've got a really interesting talk this evening. We had Mike on earlier on in the year talking about myths of hip dysplasia, and I think a lot of people have actually gone back and watched that because it's obviously a big issue, as are elbows. So this evening we're going to talk about elbow dysplasia, elbow arthritis, and just delve a little bit deeper and talk about the myths that surround elbow arthritis. If you do have questions, please do pop them along the side. We will come to them. I'll keep an eye on them, and we will come to them at relevant times. But yeah, please do ask your questions. We want to cover everybody's worries and concerns over their dog's elbows. So Mike, can I just get you to do a little introduction of yourself, and then I'm going to share a clip of something that Mike does, and we're going to put a link to this at the end as well because it's really useful. But before I go on, welcome, Mike. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Mike. I qualified from the RVC in 1997. I started life as an anaesthetist, so I have a background in pain control protocols. That's how I started, and then moved from anaesthesia into surgery. Did my residency in Glasgow University, and became a specialist 2007. And I work as a consultant in orthopedics, and my hobby, I guess you might call it, is teaching via a website and YouTube channel called Vet Lessons. So that's it.
Cue me. So I'm going to share. Hannah has made this little montage of some of Mike's videos. As I said, I'm going to put the link in at the end because it just breaks it down into really lots of things. It's not just elbow dysplasia. There's lots of little clips here on this website, and it just breaks it down and makes it really simple to understand some of the conditions. So I'm just going to add this now. Hopefully everyone can see it. I love this one. There's a little image of you there. So it's a reference library for common causes of lameness in different breeds. And also, like you see here, advice on neutering, cruciate injuries, massive deal. Everyone's heard of cruciate disease. And another one there, preparing for a vet visit. How many videos have you got up there, Mike?
Up there, I don't know. I've got, believe it or not, there's about 200 videos in total. I'm currently doing a revamp of the website. So what you guys are going to see tonight is actually new stuff. No one's seen it before. Great. It's coming to YouTube and the website soon.
Brilliant, excellent. But loads of really useful information, so do check that out. So yeah, let's get started. Let's dive into elbows. So Mike has kind of prepped me a little bit about how we're going to do this. I have got some questions. So initially, one of the myths, or one of the things we're going to talk about, is that cancer is often the only condition, or the question is, I've heard that cancer is the only condition which kills more dogs in Britain than elbow arthritis. So these are two big areas. Is that true, Mike?
Did you hear that, Nikki?
I did hear that.
You managed the prepared question extremely slick.
Well, no, I was thinking, oh, I'll put my own spin on it, and then it turns out, no, just read it as it is. That'd be much easier.
I'm glad you asked that, Nikki. I'm glad you asked that, because I've got an answer that I didn't prepare earlier. That question.
Would you like me to share your screen?
What a good idea. No, I thought you had to ask. Let's do that.
This is so slick. Right. Here we go.
Can you, Nikki, see my screen now?
I can. Right? How serious is elbow dysplasia?
Okay, so what you're looking at is how serious is elbow dysplasia, and one in a family of very helpful studies produced by the Royal Veterinary College, who have an epidemiology service called Vet Compass. They collect data, big data from all over the UK. So we know from one of their previous studies that cancer is the #1 killer of dogs in the United Kingdom. So overall, when we know the cause of death, it's about 1 in 6 dogs that lose their lives as a result of cancer in the United Kingdom. Followed relatively closely by musculoskeletal conditions. The top of that list is obviously osteoarthritis. That's the number 2 killer, with 1 in 9 deaths attributed to arthritis. Sadly, some of the most popular breeds are at the highest risk. So if you look at this study that we've got up on the screen now, the breeds which are listed are Rottweilers, Labradors, Golden Retrievers, and Springer Spaniels and German Shepherd dogs. Those are the top 5, some of our favourite breeds on that list.
Yeah.
And then again, sadly, when they looked at cause of death, they found that when a diagnosis was made of elbow arthritis, 4 times out of 10, that affected patient ended up losing their life because of their elbow arthritis. So it's a common condition, and B, a very high morbidity condition, which sadly results in loss of life of large number of dogs.
It seems very high, doesn't it? I don't think I actually really acknowledged that it was, 41%. It's much higher than I even thought. Even when I'm seeing the cases, I don't recognize that it's that much. But yeah, it's bigger than you think.
And sometimes, with any study that you read information from any study, and you have to think about the context and how they collect the data, and that there are limitations. So this is an estimate of real life rather than being definite real life, but it does give you an idea of how severe a problem this is, and it also tells you that, we take cancer extremely seriously, and arthritis. We've got only a 5% difference in the number of dogs that are euthanized as a result of arthritis and cancer.
Yeah, you would expect a bigger difference, definitely. Yeah, it is arthritis. It's a horrible word to use, but it is terminal, isn't it, in a lot of cases?
Yeah, well, the 2 conditions, they share a lot of features.
Well, let's go on.
Next question, which hasn't been rehearsed.
I will put you back on your share screen. But so does this? Should we adopt the same approach to elbow dysplasia as we do to cancer, with them being quite similar in their mortality rate, I suppose?
Yeah. So not just similar in their mortality, but similar in many ways. So I'm going to paint a picture about the similarities between the 2 conditions, and then we're going to talk about the difference in approach to the 2 conditions. So on the left of the screen, as you look at it, we have a dog who has a lump on the nose, and of course, one of the differentials for that lump on the nose is cancer. Now, one of the big take-home messages of cancer is it's not one condition. For decades, we have this universal approach to cancer. Will there be a cure for cancer? But that's a nonsensical question, because a diagnosis of cancer is not a diagnosis. If you see a mass, you need to know not just is it cancer, but you need to know what type of cancer it is, where it is, how invasive it is, what the options are for treatment, including surgical options and non-surgical options. So you need to know your enemy, collect as much information as you can about that cancer, and before you know the best way to treat it. Now, when we look at similarities, well, all the different cancers have one thing in common, that they're caused by an abnormal proliferation of cells, and that's the feature that joins them all. But their behavior is all totally different, and the same is true for arthritis. Arthritis is not a diagnosis. Arthritis, just like cancer, is an umbrella term used to cover many, many different conditions that are vastly different from one another. So when you're delivered a diagnosis of arthritis, you have to say to yourself, am I getting a diagnosis here? And the answer is, unless you do all the things you would do with cancer, collect the information so that you know your enemy? The answer is no, you don't have a definitive diagnosis. So with arthritis, we should be saying to ourselves, just like cancer, what is it exactly? Where is it? How severe is it? And then you can say, well, what is my list of options? So you take these two dogs who might be a similar age, and the dog on the left, you'll be given a whole load of options, which will include palliative care. You may be told, this dog is 15 and let's not go any further. That's palliative care. And the dog on the right-hand side might have a diagnosis when they're 10 months old. And are you going to go straight to palliative care? Because that's often the situation where you say, well, here's a dog with arthritis. We'll forget all of the stuff in between. And how often does that happen? It happens more than 78% of the time. So almost all dogs who have a diagnosis of arthritis don't get any further investigation in the UK.
78%. Gosh.
Yeah, it's about it's about 3/4 of dogs in the UK, according to Vet Compass, that have a diagnosis of arthritis which goes no further. They don't have a specific cause.
Okay, that is again, that's higher than I thought it was.
It's not higher than I thought it was.
Really?
I absolutely believe that statistic. You only need to spend a little bit of time on Facebook to see that people are getting given a diagnosis of arthritis, and they either make a choice or then just don't get given the option that they are going to default to palliative care. It's very unusual for you to have somebody that goes online and says, my dog has a specific diagnosis of elbow arthritis, which means focal coronoid disease, or moderate elbow dysplasia. They don't have all the detail that you'd get if you had a diagnosis of cancer.
So what do you think? That's because it's not then being discussed, or that people are then choosing as an owner to go then for what we're sort of calling, I suppose, palliative care, but actually you could also call it management, I suppose, of the condition.
I'll come out of here, right? So
do you think people aren't being given the options?
I think that there's a combination of factors that contribute, and it comes down in part to wishful thinking, and I think that one of the things that we need to cover in a lot of detail is that what drives people to go down one path or another. So the questions that you have spontaneously come up with and that you're going to ask me shortly, they're designed to ask the question, why would people to choose to go down one route or another route? What's the motivation, and what's the reason why you might want to change your behavior?
I mean, I think, well, we'll get to the end and have a think a little bit more about that. And it's shocking, really. 75%, such a high amount. But we will go on, and then we'll come back to think about that, because I have my own views about maybe what's going on there. But we'll have a little think about that.
You're going to get some answers as we go along, because that's a really good question and it's covered.
Yeah, perfect. So the other thing we're going to talk about this evening is that we don't know lots about hip dysplasia, but it seems to be a lot more frequently talked about than elbow dysplasia. And it's almost like I feel a little bit calmer about hips than I do elbows. And so are there any similarities between the hip dysplasia and the elbow dysplasia?
I'm glad you asked.
I'm getting better at this, I think. Here we go. The squirrel, by the way, means that we're having a pause. For anyone that doesn't know,
the squirrel is there to stop you from talking. Shut up, Mike. Squirrel. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a little tour through two conditions with the same word in their name. Dysplasia means abnormal development, and we're going to compare and contrast the two, starting with the more familiar, which is hip dysplasia. So hip dysplasia we've known about for a lot longer than we've known about elbow dysplasia, and the joint's a simpler joint. There's two bones acting as a ball and socket, very much like a human joint. So we've had lots of factors that have led to us having a lot more detail about hip dysplasia, how it happens, what to expect, and how best to treat it. Now, the starting point is to define some grades of hip dysplasia, and this is a simplification of a spectrum where at one end of the spectrum you have a totally normal hip, which is a ball and socket joint owned by a dog who has no genes that code for hip dysplasia, or they have genes that code for hip dysplasia, but those genes haven't been expressed. So somehow those genes have remained dormant, and then you move from normal to mild hip dysplasia, and mild hip dysplasia is coded by a genetic predisposition towards laxity in the tissues that surround the hip joint. So there's a collagen defect in those tissues that surround the hip joint that makes the hip joint looser than it should be. Development, it's not a congenital condition. Usually they think it starts around 2 months of age. And then we change from mild through moderate, where you've got obvious laxity, to the severe form where you can have a kind of complete divorce between the acetabulum and the femoral head, and that's called a luxoid hip, which is your worst case scenario. And so we know this is primarily a genetic condition. So if you want to say, well, what's the thing that drives an animal towards being normal? Overwhelmingly, it's the genetics of that dog. So if you have a whippet, a greyhound, or a borzoi, it doesn't matter what you do with those dogs when they're developing. As in puppyhood, you could make a whippet as fat as you like. You could let them exercise as much as they liked. You could essentially neglect them. But regardless of what you do, their genes are protective. And that means that they're probably, despite their environment, going to develop normal hips. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have a bulldog, a dog de Bordeaux, or a pug. And those dogs are genetically pre-programmed to develop hip dysplasia in most cases. In those instances, it doesn't matter what you do with their environment, and they're probably going to develop hip dysplasia, even if you're very careful with them during puppyhood, if you give them the right diet, if you do the right thing with exercise, and you manipulate their environment, they're still very likely to develop some degree of hip dysplasia. So the challenging dogs are the ones that sit in that middle ground, the moderate risk dogs, the dogs that have genes that code for hip dysplasia that could go in one of two directions. And these are the ones we're most interested in, because these give us control. As an owner of a puppy that maybe go in one direction or another, there's something that we can do about it, and that something that we can do about it is to keep them lean during puppyhood. So we know, based on one of the best studies that's ever been done in orthopedics, that if you take predisposed puppies and you keep them with a body condition score of 5 or less out of 9, they have a 5 times lower incidence of hip dysplasia compared to puppies that have a body condition score of 6 or more out of 9. So we have a very powerful tool at our disposal as carers for manipulating whether or not those genes of hip dysplasia will be expressed, and that's to control body fat.
Yeah, and I think that study's referred to quite a bit in some of our lives. Is that's the one with the Labradors, with the
correct? So this is what the reason it's the most powerful study that we have is that it's a true experimental study. Most studies that we have looking at risk are what's called they're called observational studies. That means we look back in time at what happened to dogs. And there are many different variables that could trigger a problem. And then you ask retrospectively, what's the relationship between a variable you're interested in, say neutering, and whether they'll develop a problem in the future. And the problem with an observational study is that you don't know which of the variables historically was the cause of the problem. It could be that a dog, for example, was neutered, but it could be that they were neutered and therefore they gained weight because 3 times more chance of being overweight if you're neutered. And it's actually the weight gain that causes them to develop a problem. Now, what what Gail Smith and his team did at University of Pennsylvania is that they did the most epic study where they controlled everything in a dog's environment, in these puppies' environment, and the one variable was body condition. And then they followed them actually to end of life. And in that group of puppies, the lean ones, they had 5 times lower incidence of hip dysplasia, less arthritis overall. The onset of arthritis was delayed. So in the dogs that were overweight, 6 years old onset. In the dogs that were lean, 12 years old onset.
Yeah.
A difference in lifespan of 1.8 years. So
amazing.
This study is A, super powerful, and B, the results are kind of mind-blowing. They tell us that we can make a big difference, but we can make a big difference with the one thing that everybody ignores, and that's keeping a puppy lean. All people talk about is the 5-minute rule that absolutely drives me mad. So
and me, yeah.
So what?
And it comes up probably every day because there's so many puppies coming through at the moment. At least one of those people that's going to come through is going to ask you about that, and I don't know how it's been sticking around because we try and get rid of that and talk about body weight.
I'm glad you asked. I am glad you asked because we can move on to the next slide.
Let's do it.
An excellent question that wasn't rehearsed.
Yes.
So this is it's a slide which contains a lot of detail. So I'm going to just walk you through what this slide is telling us.
And I will put a link to this and you can find it in, I just should say it's about all these vet lessons things, the vet lessons, they're all slides that are already up on your website, aren't they? That people can go back to and look at.
A lot of the information is, but actually a lot of the information isn't. So if you want it, you need to subscribe to the YouTube channel. So there's 2 reasons to subscribe to the YouTube channel. One is that it's the way that I make money for the charities. Vet Lessons is non-profit.
Right.
So what happens when people subscribe to the YouTube channel is that it drives up my visibility on search engines. And if it drives up my visibility on search engines, then I can increase profile and therefore increase income for the charities that I am making money for. So it will remain non-profit forever. That I have no plan to make this into a business. What I need is subscribers, really. So most of the content is still being built, and it will go up on YouTube intermittently. Once every week, something goes up on YouTube.
Great.
So what you're
worth subscribing, but yes, please do carry on.
No, thank you for the plug. So what we're doing here on this page is that we're talking about the answer to the question you asked earlier is that what motivates people towards one choice or another, and what we're going to talk about here is moving on from the last slide, where on the last slide I said to you, if you were to want to have almost zero risk of hip dysplasia, then you would get yourself a whippet. And if you go on the OFA, so this is Orthopedic Foundation for Animals, so you can scan the code if you've got your mobile phone there, or you can recommend it to owners. It's ofa.org, so it's a really useful site. So they look at multiple inherited conditions and then they give you a list of risks. So we're concentrating on orthopedic conditions.
Yeah.
Now, what we know then is that if you want to have close to zero risk, you get a whippet. But of course, your choice of dog breed is a personal choice. And if you don't like whippets and you prefer bulldogs, you'll have a good reason to prefer bulldogs. There will be something about bulldogs that motivates you to want to have a bulldog and not a whippet.
Yeah.
So what happens in your psyche at this point is something called cognitive dissonance. And now what cognitive dissonance means is that at the same time, you're holding 2 realities in your mind, and those 2 realities conflict. And the best example of cognitive dissonance would be smoking. So we know that if you smoke, it's very bad for your health and it will kill you potentially. But on the other hand, you may smoke 20 cigarettes every day. So you have this internal battle, which says, on the one hand, I know that it's really unhealthy, but on the other hand, I really want to smoke 20 cigarettes every day. So the best way of resolving your internal conflicts is to say, I'm going to quit smoking. So in this instance, that would be, I know I want a bulldog, but I know they get problems, so I'm not going to get a bulldog. I'm going to get a whippet.
Yeah.
So that would be the equivalent of saying, I'm going to quit cigarettes. Now, that's easier said than done. So what do you do if you can't quit bulldogs? You really want a bulldog and you don't whip it. So what you do is you have to create an internal narrative, and that internal narrative has to conform with your belief. And so if you're in that situation where you smoke 20 cigarettes a day, but you know it's unhealthy, then your internal narrative will be, right, well, I tried to quit cigarettes, but it's very difficult. And actually, the reality is that cigarettes calm me down, and actually stress and anxiety, that could kill me. And if I were to quit cigarettes, then I'm only going to get fat. And if I get fat, that could kill me. And besides, my great aunt, she smokes 40 cigarettes a day and she lived to 100. So what you'll do is you'll talk yourself into an internal narrative which suits your bias. That's a totally human thing to do. So if you love bulldogs, for example, and you go on the OFA website and you say, oh my gosh, look at their rankings, 70% of the best bulldogs. So these are submitted for breeding purposes. So these are the creme de la creme of bulldogs. Well, I've got 7 out of 10 chance of that bulldog developing hip dysplasia. How do I settle that internal conflict? Well, you settle that conflict by saying, okay, well, I'm going to buy a bulldog, but what I'm going to do is when they're a puppy, I'll only walk them for 5 minutes for every month of age, and that'll protect them from hip dysplasia. And do you know what I'll also do? I'll put them on a glucosamine chondroitin supplement, because that will protect them from hip dysplasia. And anything which will give you evidence to support what's essentially a fallacy, that is, that if you only give them 5 minutes of exercise, that your bulldog's got a better chance of being normal, or if you give glucosamine in puppyhood, your bulldog's got a better chance of normal. Anything which gives you a whiff that might be true, you're going to grasp hold of, and that's going to be your defense of getting yourself a dog that you want a bulldog.
Which is why these myths never go away, because people desperately want to believe them. And
exactly right. So these myths, they suit a lot of people. So no, they won't ever go away, and they're actually incredibly harmful, because what happens when people start to focus on a myth like that you can give glucosamine and that will protect your dog against developmental orthopedic conditions, or you can do 5 minutes of exercise. And the 5 minutes of exercise is absolutely ridiculous, because what you're saying is that I have a dog who's got laxity of their hip joints in puppyhood. So if you've got a loose joint, what do you need to do? Imagine taking a child to a pediatric surgeon with loose hips, and the pediatric surgeon say, do you know what you need to do with your child? You need to get the least possible exercise. What we'll do is we'll reduce their core strength as much as possible, so we get those muscles as weak as we can, and that'll do them good. We don't want them exercising. That's the worst thing you could do. Meet other children, play with them. Oh Christ, no! If you do that, the dysplasia will get worse. It's bonkers. And above all else, we actually got published evidence saying that if you restrict exercise, there's a higher likelihood that you're going to develop hip dysplasia.
Yes. So, there's plenty of evidence to actually that's saying about strengthening the joints with. There's been studies where people have really overdone it with their dogs, haven't they? And actually, they come out with much. Not that I'm saying we should do that, but there is evidence to say that a lot of exercise can give you very strong joints. So this
is precisely what they know from people, and there was some extraordinary studies that were done in puppies. They took beagle puppies, and they ran 2 studies in the 80s and 90s where they ran them on treadmills while they were puppies. They might seem familiar to you, but these were famous studies. They ran them on treadmills, and the first study they did, these puppies did 4 kilometers every day uphill on a treadmill. So we're talking about moderately hard exercise on hard ground. So treadmills are not, it's high impact exercise. And then they looked at what happened to their joints, and those joints weren't affected by those puppies running on the treadmill. And then they said, well, let's go completely insane here and we'll have them run a marathon a day during puppyhood. So these puppies were running 40 kilometers a day uphill on a treadmill every day during puppyhood.
Yeah.
What happened to them? Did they develop cruciate disease? Did they develop hip dysplasia?
Yeah.
When they looked with a microscope at their joints, did they see evidence of cartilage pathology? No, they didn't.
Yeah.
What they saw was some focal change in glycosaminoglycans within their knee joints, and they said, here we go, exercise can trigger arthritis. And then people who support the 5 minutes fallacy, because obviously we know it suits them, will say, well, here we go, we've got evidence. If you run 40 kilometers a day on a treadmill in puppyhood as a beagle puppy, then it will give you a focal change in glycosaminoglycans within your knee joint.
So I mean, you can interpret things as you wish, can't you? Just to make it like you said.
We can cherry pick the evidence.
And that's always going to happen. Can we just on that slide that you've got up there with the hips? What do the other numbers mean?
So what I've highlighted, so the first category here is breed rank, and then now breed rank, it's just kind of, you have to sort of take it or leave it. There's about 200 breeds on this database, and you're looking at your breed next to another breed. So you want a bulldog, and you know that your bulldog is going to rank number 4 for elbow dysplasia and number 2 for hip dysplasia, and it's high ranked. So that's compared to other breeds. But how important that is it's a matter of opinion. What you really want to know is what's the probability of normal or abnormal, and that's the number that I've got circled there just for hip. And you can do the same for elbows or any of these conditions. It's there on the OFA site. It's a really good resource if anyone wants to get a puppy, and I definitely, they shouldn't do it without looking at this resource first.
No, that's really useful. I'll put the link in the notes obviously afterwards, but that's good.
So where were we? I went on a rant.
No, that's fine. It always comes up, the whole 5 minute thing, and it is what it is, and we'll continue to deal with it as we need to.
Yeah, I run it past people in so many different ways, but this is the reason that the myth exists. It's because it gives people an opportunity to support something which will resolve an internal conflict, and that internal conflict is, I prefer a dog from a breed that I know is predisposed to problems, and I'm going to find a way to justify that choice. There's no malice in that. It's just a human thing to do.
I love that, and it makes it so much more simple to understand when you talk about the whole smoker thing.
Quite. How many times do you hear that story? I know somebody who's smoked and lived to 100. That's one that will never grow old. So we move on to the subject that I'm supposed to be discussing, which is elbow dysplasia. And we can run elbow dysplasia through a kind of similar protocol. That is, that we have on the left-hand side of this image a normal, and then we move through gradual degrees of severity. And just like hip dysplasia, these are an oversimplification of something which is essentially an infinite spectrum. At one end, normal, and one end you've got a severely arthritic elbow joint, and in between the two you've got degrees of severity. And once again, we ask ourselves the most important question: how do we drive our patients towards normal? And once again, we know how to do it. You pick a dog from a low risk breed, and so you can go on the OFA website. And again, you could whip it, for example, and that if you get a whip it, then the chances are very low they're going to develop elbow dysplasia, regardless of their environment. And if you were to pick a chow, then that they're going to be on the severe end of the spectrum, and you've got a much higher chance of them developing elbow dysplasia, regardless of what you do in their environment. But there's one critical difference between these two. That is that in those studies that were done at Penn State, diet and body condition score didn't improve your chances of developing normal elbows in the future. So having a low body condition score was protective against hip dysplasia, and having a low body condition score is protective against cruciate ligament disease, but it's not protective against elbow dysplasia. So with elbow dysplasia, we don't have the weapons that we do with hip dysplasia or cruciate disease. We can't keep our dog's body condition score low and expect to make an impact on whether they develop elbow dysplasia.
It doesn't make any sense, does it? Or does it?
It might make sense, and the reason that it might make sense is that when you have a study which says that we showed a positive relationship, a positive outcome, then that's likely to be true. So if I say I compare surgical management of cruciate disease and non-surgical management of cruciate disease, and my finding is that you get a significantly better outcome with operating, I've shown a positive difference between the two, therefore it exists. But if you ask the same question 10 years ago, and this was done, if you ask the same question 15 years ago, this study was done and it said there was no difference between the two. And that's not because there was no difference between the two, it's because the study was unable to detect a difference between the two. And those are two very different things. So when I say that we don't have the weapons, it might be that diet makes a difference, but the difference is too small for the studies to be able to measure it.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're going to do a kind of parallel comparison here. We take a high-risk breed. So Rottweilers are one of my favorites. I love Rottweiler, and I see them sadly far too often.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, they're great dogs. And so again, you go on the OFA website and you look up your selected breed, in this case Rottweiler, who were ranked number 1 on the UK study for dogs that are going to be affected by arthritis. And they're actually, when you look at submitted x-rays, they rank number 3 behind, in the USA, Chow and Pug, believe it or not, number 2.
Really?
Yeah. And then we look at their risk and it's lower. So this time it's about a 4 out of 10 chance of the kind of best of breed, again, the creme de la creme of Rottweilers whose x-rays are submitted to the OFA. Okay. So we look at this and we see number of evaluations, 22,339. So this is big data we're looking at. And for these who are supposed to be the lowest risk within the breed, we have about a 4 out of 10 chance of them having abnormal elbows. So, once again, we just go through the same internal conflict. I'm a big fan of Rottweilers, and I can understand why somebody would want a Rottweiler. And I'm also a big fan of Whippets, to be fair. But if somebody wants a Rottweiler, they want a Rottweiler. And so they'll go through the same process and they'll say, well, I want to reduce risk. I can't do it this time with diet, but even if you could, you probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
So what will I do instead? Well, I'll follow the 5 minutes rule and I'll put my puppy on glucosamine and maybe that will help, but it won't. So we need to find something else that will.
So out of interest, so you say that pugs are number 1 for this, right?
Number 2, yeah. Pugs actually number 1 for hip dysplasia. Pugs are absolutely they're full of problems. Really?
So what percentage are they coming out as then on the elbows? Can you remember?
Oh, you're asking me off the top of my head.
Sorry.
I don't know.
I just wouldn't have put them up there. I just didn't.
So chows are 48.
Wow.
So about half of the best chows in USA breeding system are affected by elbow dysplasia. Then pugs are somewhere in between 48 and 38.
That's crazy.
But of course, pugs and bulldogs are a great example of that. We don't know what normal looks like, and one of the things that Cam is really, really good at doing is emphasizing that you've got to understand what normal looks like in order to know what abnormal looks like, and that's the starting point of everything. We can't make an impact on a condition unless you know what normal looks like, and of course, a bulldog walks abnormally. Everyone walks,
and it's almost normally abnormal, I suppose, because we're so used to seeing it like that.
So what we say is that that's a normal bulldog, but of course a normal bulldog has hip dysplasia and elbow dysplasia. So do they walk like that because they've got horrible hips and elbows? Probably they do.
Yeah.
It's just that we have to kind of pivot and adapt to what's a new normal, and compared to the ancestor of the wolf who was essentially genetically perfect.
Yes.
We do have a new normal, and the new
We're
normal
quite far away from that. Yeah.
is abnormal.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. I just, didn't even think. But you're right though. The reason I didn't think it is because I'm just so used to seeing that way, and so you don't think, oh yeah, they've got dodgy hips, because you just almost expect them to be like that, and it's just
Right. I mean, it's just, as does everybody. And if you we've got a massive data came from the hip registry. So the hip registry, as you know, they look at the dogs that have had a hip replacement. They're looking at outcome data for dogs that had a hip replacement.
Yeah.
So the breeds that are number one and number two on incidence of hip dysplasia, there's none of them that had hip replacement.
No.
That's because we accepted what's normal for those breeds.
Yeah. Yeah. So they don't go that way. Sorry, I should have put us back on that.
It's my fault.
I should have put us back on that ages ago. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, the OFA, that's based in the US, isn't it, though?
Yeah, so we have Kennel Club, and they have a very good website. BVA Kennel Club have a very good website, and you can go on there and look at their information. They've got some great owner guides to risk analysis and estimated breeding value, and they're written in plain English, so I recommend them too. But if you want, if you're after just data and
so many numbers,
big numbers of data, then that's a good place to look.
Yeah, because things like, breeds like Rotties are, from what I don't know, I've never worked in America, but I think breeds like Rotties are quite similar, aren't they, between the two countries? But there are other breeds where they're bred slightly differently, and they do look slightly different. You can almost.
Yes, and that's a very interesting observation. It brings us kind of down to risk. We're going to talk a bit about genetics, I think, in a moment.
Yeah.
But, one of the things which is interesting is that risk is actually related to what a dog looks like, and the more a dog looks like a low risk breed, less likely they are to have a problem. We have this fallacy of hybrid vigor, which means if you take two dogs and breed them together of different breeds, then some magic occurs, and they don't develop problems. Of course, this is a myth.
If you're breeding a Rottie with a Labrador, then possibly not.
Yeah, quite. If you take two breeds with equivalent risk, and they're both medium risk for hip dysplasia, for example, then you're not diluting bad genes. You're going to end up with something that's much the same. But there's interesting studies that elbow dysplasia, the breed that's studied most is, apart from the Labrador, is Bernese Mountain Dog.
Okay.
And in certain countries, Bernese Mountain Dogs are easily the highest risk breed for elbow dysplasia. So in some studies in Switzerland, where obviously they're not from Burma. I always laugh when we call them Bernese Mountain Dogs. But Swiss Bernese Mountain Dogs, 8 out of 10 of them in some studies have elbow dysplasia. Whereas if you look in the US population of Bernese Mountain Dogs, the incidence is much lower. So there are variations, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on from that then, when we're talking about looking at the breeds and scoring them, how do you feel about hip scores and elbow scores? Well, let's talk about elbows in particular, because elbow score, when I first qualified as a vet, we were mainly doing hips, and then the elbows kind of crept in as an extra. I guess it's always been there, but we just never really paid as much attention to them. But what are the chances, if you have got parents with great elbows, what are your chances of getting a good puppy?
I'm glad you asked.
That's another one that I've been primed for. I love this.
So
I haven't. Your screen isn't up yet.
Okay. So when it is, just give me a shout and I'll start chin wagging.
Okay, let me try and. I don't think. Have you? Oh, there we go. It's there. Yeah.
It's there. Okay. Well, I'll press play again.
That's it.
So how controllable is elbow dysplasia, and it's one thing that humans love, and it's to be in control. And if one thing that we absolutely hate is to feel like we don't have control. So the idea of a controllable condition appeals to our human nature, and there is a lot of information about.
Sorry, that's my Labrador. She's just whining. Sorry.
Your elephant. So
I know.
there's a lot of information about control program. Absolutely masses of information out there. I won't go into too much detail. Number one, because it's too complex. Number two, because it is extremely dry. So I'll ask questions. I'll ask questions that are important to us, and then I'll try and give as simple answer as I can. So the first question, how many genes are responsible? The reason for this question, I think, is that we as humans have a need to try to make things as simple as possible. And if a condition is complex, we'll try and simplify it if we can. That's why I use so many analogies. And what we think of when we think of a genetic condition is often simple genetics. So, for example, cystic fibrosis. There's a one gene condition, a single gene condition. So one gene tells your body you're going to have cystic fibrosis. If you have it, you've got it. If you don't, you don't. So you take a parent, one that does and one that doesn't, and you have sort of this Mendelian chance of developing a problem as a child. It's simple, that kind of genetics. And that's when you've got one gene, but it's still not entirely simple. Now, they've estimated there are hundreds of genes that that contribute to conditions like hip dysplasia, elbow dysplasia, and cruciate disease. It's not 1, 2, 3, or 5. There are hundreds of them. So the more complex the genetics, the more difficult it is to predict what's going to happen. And that brings us to how predictive are X-rays. And so, what we're doing here is we're taking a genetic condition with hundreds of genes that code for it, and we're saying, well, we can't test for those genes. There are blood tests, as you know, which look for candidate genes, but when those blood tests were looked at recently, they were shown to be not predictive. So we haven't got that right yet. So are X-rays predictive for elbow dysplasia? Well, they're a pretty blunt tool, and they're not really very good at predicting. What they do is they give us the best that we have available to us. If you really wanted to predict, you have to do an operation and look inside the elbows. And we can't use surgery as a screening program, so we use something which is relatively cheap and isn't going to harm our patient. But do they do a good job? No, not really. They don't do a very good job. And that leads us to, the expectation. What do we expect from these things? And I like to give people a little story to illustrate a realistic expectation from breeding programs. And this little story is this. So if you picture that instead of an animal with a genetic condition, that we have a person who, as a youngster, is a fit and healthy person, has a good diet, does lots of exercise, and then kind of life takes over and they stop exercising as they did before, and they have a pretty bad diet. And over the course of about 5 years, they develop a big problem with weight gain, and they end up being quite overweight. And so they want to solve their problem of gaining weight over the course of the last 5 years, and they go onto a search engine and they look for information about the best way to lose weight.
Oh, I've been there, done that.
Really a kind of situation. So as you're browsing, looking at the best ways to lose weight, something pops up on your browser, and the thing that pops up on your browser is an infomercial which tells you that that they have a magic trick which will allow you to get a six-pack within 2 weeks. Now, the reason that those things exist is because that's what we would like to believe. We would like to believe that something that accumulated over the course of 5 years, in this case, can be fixed over the course of 2 weeks. A sensible person who doesn't have a wishful thinking bias would go, well, that's ridiculous.
That's impossible.
They would say, well, I'm not going to do it. But these things exist because people want to believe it, and it's exactly the same with breeding programs for developmental orthopedic problems. Now, it took about 500 years of ignorance to breed conditions like hip dysplasia into popular breeds like Labradors, and German Shepherds. They weren't there in the beginning, and it took many generations of just not knowing that these things existed, and then suddenly we realize our mistake and we need to turn the clocks back. And we expect to be able to do it in 1 or 2 generations. Well, sorry, that's just not a realistic goal. It's going to take many generations before we make an improvement. So I feel sorry for breeders, because what happens with the breeder is they do the best they can. They have dogs, sire and dam, who have low hip scores, low elbow scores, and ideally 0 scores for elbows. And then puppies develop elbow dysplasia, and the owner thinks that they've been hoodwinked. But that's because there's a misunderstanding of what these things are able to promise. What they're able to promise is gradual improvement in the breed over generations, but not an instant fix, right?
And so do you feel that there will be better blood tests coming?
Probably not in my lifetime. I suspect, given how long it took to develop a blood test which doesn't work very well, I suspect it might take
a long while.
How long have we been working on a coronavirus vaccine for cats?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
it's forever, right?
Yeah.
As soon as somebody chucks an absolute ton of money at it,
then it's done.
Yeah, we get a vaccine for coronavirus. So probably the answer is that, if there was limitless funds, this would happen pretty quickly, but there isn't. So
there are bigger priorities to be dealing with. Yeah.
So what's that? So then the last question, which is a really common one and particularly important for conditions where you can get a diagnosis in puppyhood, like elbow dysplasia, is that if you get a diagnosis of elbow dysplasia in an immature animal, then what's the number needed to treat? And so illustration of number needed to treat is that we know that if you have high cholesterol, you have a chance of developing a cardiovascular event, a heart attack or a stroke. So we have statins available. So how many people do you have to put on a statin to prevent a stroke in one person? It's around about 150.
Okay.
So what doctors do is that they do, a risk analysis, and they say, well, is it worth treating 150 people to prevent one stroke? And that depends on how bad statins are in terms of side effects and cost. And we run these analyses to work out, how many patients do we need to treat in order to prevent a future problem. And that's the next subject that we cover.
Yes. So,
which is a little bit about what people believe happens compared to what actually happens with elbow dysplasia. And so this is a pair of myths that are related to one another, and then finally what actually happens. So myth number 1 is that arthritis involves slow age-related wear. So here, what we see is a 1-year-old with a loose fragment, and then as the years tick by, we gradually get progression of osteoarthritis until we get to old age, when this gradual progression of osteoarthritis is going to cause clinical signs in the animal. And there's no surprise that this myth grabs our attention as people, because that's what we expect from people. You don't expect an adolescent to go to a doctor and be diagnosed with osteoarthritis, but you do expect elderly people to have a high chance of osteoarthritis. So we extrapolate and we say, well, it must be the same for dogs. And when we do that extrapolation, what that does is it opens a window of opportunity to us, and that leads us on to myth number 2. And as I said before, we love control, and if myth number 1 was true, then what we could do is we could give a supplement, and if we gave that supplement to our at-risk patient, then that supplement would slow the progression of osteoarthritis, so that if you took 2 dogs and put them side by side, and the one that had no supplement would have bad arthritis at 9, and the one that had a supplement would have half as bad arthritis at 9. And of course, this is a myth that is appealing to people, and that you can offer a biological cure to a mechanical problem, but that's what it is. It's a myth, and
as much as you want to believe it,
it's not. It's
the evidence is not there.
So the reality is very difficult to swallow, which is that most of the damage is already done before a puppy reaches adulthood. So we looked at the different forms of elbow dysplasia, and you have normal, mild, moderate, and severe. And which path a puppy takes, it's coded into their genes. If they're going to develop mild elbow dysplasia, that's a done deal by the time they're 1. If they're going to develop moderate elbow dysplasia, that's a done deal by their 1. And severe, it's a done deal by the time they're 1. And what we mean when we talk about number needed to treat is that we're trying to look at those patients who are at risk of developing that severe form by the time they're 1, and doing something to reduce the risk of that severe form developing in the future. That's what we mean when we talk about number needed to treat. And we're not going to do that with a biological treatment like a supplement, even though we would love that to be true. We have to think of something different.
Yes. So that's, we have there are loads of questions that I think we're going to cover in the next bit, actually. But so basically, on from that, what should we do?
For God's sake, if you're a surgeon, don't tell people that supplements have limited efficacy, because what happens if you're a surgeon like me or anyone, and you say to people something that is popular has a limited effect, then people don't hear.
They don't want to hear it.
What people hear is, I don't want them to have a limited effect, because what I want to do is get my scalpel out and cut things up, which couldn't be further from the truth. My life would be so much better if glucosamine and chondroitin and everything else prevented arthritis developing. If that happened, I would quit being an orthopedic surgeon and I'd go and work for a drug company. It's important to me, but it doesn't. But of course, people don't like it when you say, something which is relatively low cost, very low risk, doesn't have the giant effect that people think it does.
Yeah. I mean, there's such good adverts around supplements, and there's such good, especially with social media, and everyone has got a story, haven't they? Because it's worked for them. Like my 90-year-old smoking granny who's running a marathon, and everyone has a story, but it's not, you just get a tagline. You don't get the whole picture about what else has been going on with this dog, and why it may be responding. It may not be down to the supplements, but everyone wants to believe it because, like you say, it's a really nice, uninvasive, lovely option.
Yeah.
But the truth is,
you hit the nail on the head there. You know what the Latin translation is for try to please? The Latin translation for try to please is placebo. So the word placebo literally means try to please. And what more noble thing is there for us to do than to try to please or help an animal that's painful? They can't help themselves. So it's our obligation to help them. So is it a surprise that there's a very powerful caregiver placebo effect in dogs? No, there isn't a surprise. Again, one of the best studies that's ever been published shows the placebo effect was 58%. So 6 out of 10 people who knew they had a 50-50 chance they were giving a placebo to their arthritic dog said it made a significant improvement to their dog.
Yeah.
Now, if your choice is based on testimonials, based on somebody telling you on Facebook, my dog's life was completely changed by pick your supplement.
Yeah, whichever one. Yeah.
Whichever one you want.
You move, whatever,
About a 6 out of 10 chance that if that person was giving a completely inactive placebo, they'd have the same glowing reference for that inactive placebo. Now our information, it needs to be based on as much as we can on facts, and we have to be a bit careful about how we interpret data, that we don't let our own personal wants, needs, and biases enter the equation, because you could say, and probably there'll be a million of these saying, yes, but there's a study that shows glucosamine does this, or there's a study that glucosamine does that. Now, yeah, there are. If you put some cells in culture on a petri dish and you add certain molecules to those cells in culture, you can show that you can protect those cells from a future problem. If you create a cartilage defect in a rabbit's knee that's otherwise normal and you give them a glucosamine supplement, you can see that they have a higher chance of that healing more quickly. But that has absolutely no resemblance whatsoever to clinical elbow dysplasia.
Yeah.
It just isn't representative. We'd love to believe that it was, but it isn't.
And we just to say, we're not saying don't use supplements at all. We're just talking specifically because there is, we've had lives on here before about omega-3s, for example, and some of the work that's being done with them, and they appear to have some benefits. But we're specifically talking about elbows, aren't we?
Well, yeah.
I know. With chondroitin and glucosamine, I know it's very limited, full stop. But there are some.
Okay, let me give you another analogy. We did it a moment ago. We talked about the person who'd spent 5 years gaining weight. Okay.
Yeah.
So the person spends 5 years gaining weight and they desperately want to lose weight. And this is a very important thing to very many people. So you're browsing around and you're asking Dr. Google and you're asking your friends, and then you hear about a supplement that induces weight loss. So the supplement contains, for example, caffeine, which has a lot of evidence to support it. So you're in this position that you want to lose weight and you read about this supplement. So what questions do you ask? You want to know, does it work? That's the first question you ask. Is there evidence to support that a caffeine-containing supplement will induce weight loss? Yes, there is a ton of evidence that support that if you take a weight loss supplement containing caffeine, that you'll lose weight. Evidence is there. So number 2 question, what's the risk to me if I take a supplement containing caffeine? It is going to harm me. And the answer is that the side effects are very small. So, it's just caffeine. There may be some other things in these supplements, but the chance of you harming yourself are very, very small. So 2 good answers for you. And then number 3, is it's going to cost me a lot of money? And the answer is no, it's cheap. So, what are you going to do when you're given this information? Why would you not?
Yeah.
Why would you not take that tablet? It works. It's got scientific evidence to prove it, and it's low risk and cheap. Everything is in its favor. So what happens then when you take your weight loss supplement? Are you going to take your weight loss supplement and simultaneously go onto a Mediterranean diet and run for 3 times every week because they're the healthiest ways to lose weight? Absolutely not. Why would you? Why would you do all the other useful things
when
in your life?
When you've got an easy option.
When you've got a pill. So when you ask the question, but there's no harm in giving these supplements. There's no direct harm in giving these supplements, but there is a very, very important indirect harm of giving these supplements. You take an extreme example of people who treat children who can't make decisions for themselves with sometimes really serious conditions using homeopathy. And you could say, well, I believe in homeopathy, but there was a family in Australia where the parents are doctors who treated a child with homeopathy for eczema, a totally treatable condition. That child died. So these are illustrations that when you take your eye off the ball because you believe something that doesn't work really does work, you take your eye off the ball. You're not going to focus on the things that really do work. And
no, that's fair enough.
So what I do is I kind of drag people back. It's the first law of thermodynamics is that you can't get something from nothing. So, we're looking at elbow dysplasia. We're going to talk about surgery, for example. The effect of surgery is the most profound effect that you get when you want to treat a dog with elbow dysplasia. So you look at the downside. You do an operation and it's got adverse effects. So effects are balanced by adverse effects. Given non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, effects are balanced by adverse effects. and they're usually relatively equal and opposite. That's just basic physics. And then you take us down to, for example, a magnetic collar. Wouldn't it be wonderful if something with 0 side effects and very little cost had profound benefits? But that breaks the rules. If something doesn't have a powerful enough effect to give a side effect, then it won't have a powerful enough effect.
Yeah. You've got to go for the big guns.
Well, I think we have to be realistic, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying. Yeah, you know, don't forget that it's not everything. I mean, Lynn's just written here, gives a supplement low, but it's low on the list of priorities, and I think this is quite a good one. So, in order, pain relief, prevention of further injury, weight control, rebuild, and we're going to talk about specifically about elbow treatments. But yeah, absolutely, Lynn. It low on the list, and it shouldn't be your be all and end all.
Lynn, I love you for saying that. Thank you. The other reason I love you is because you've segued perfectly into this next slide.
Yes. So treatments. What should we do? And I appreciate there isn't one answer.
No. So for every complex problem, there is a simple, clear answer that's wrong. So I'm going to bring us now into an analogy that I use with every carer that I see of a dog that has elbow dysplasia, regardless of the form of elbow dysplasia. And this analogy, I think, is a very nice way of explaining what happens. And I really do believe it illustrates elbow dysplasia. So what we do here is that we imagine that instead of a dysplastic elbow, we have a child's foot. And the thing about a child's foot is that as they're growing up, you have to regularly change their shoes, because to have a normal foot, you have to have a shoe that fits you perfectly. And with elbow dysplasia, to have a normal elbow, everything needs to fit together perfectly. And when it doesn't, by definition, you have elbow dysplasia. So what we have is a child who's gradually getting bigger and bigger feet. And then at some point during their growth spurt, their shoes stop being changed. So something goes wrong with the mechanism for buying new shoes, and they get stuck in the same shoe. Now, if that happens at the beginning of their growth spurt, it's going to have a massive implication for their feet. And if it happens relatively late in their growth spurt, it has a small implication for what happens to their feet. That, in a nutshell, is what happens for developing dogs with elbow dysplasia. So, so picture this scenario. You are the parent of a little girl in this instance who is having problems with their feet. So we look at, this is taken from the CAM website, and we look at the pyramid of treatment. And at the bottom, we have always what belongs at the bottom of one of these pyramids. So the bottom being the kind of pillar, the most important section is that you need to know there's a problem in the first instance. So you need to know that there's something wrong with your child's feet in order to know that you need to do something about it. So that's the number one. And then with our child's feet, we move down and we say, well, what will we do? Make our child lighter? Well, is that going to help? Probably not. What about changing the home environment? Is that going to help? Not really.
Probably not.
What about if I modify exercise? Well, that might make a little difference, but probably not a big difference.
Yeah.
And so then we take a little pause at nutrition and supplements. And once again, we'll look at supplements in a different way. So let's say that you take your little girl to a podiatrist, and the podiatrist examines your little girl's feet. And they say, yep, sure enough, there's a really bad problem of blistering on her big toe. And you say, oh gosh, what am I going to do about this problem of blistering on the big toe? And then the podiatrist says to you, well, you might know this already, but skin is made of collagen. And if we want skin to heal, you need more collagen. So what we'll do is that we'll change your little girl's diet. So she's got more collagen in it. And we're going to give her a collagen supplement. So an oral supplement that's apply her more collagen. And when we do that, the skin of her toe is going to heal up more quickly. Now, if that happened to you with your child at a podiatrist, what would you do? I would run for the hills. I would never go back
You don't know
there.
what you're talking about.
They're talking nonsense.
Yeah.
That is beyond implausible. That taking an oral supplement that allows skin to regrow will fix a problem caused by a poorly fitting shoe.
Yeah.
So we move down the pyramid. Anti-inflammatory medications. Well, give some paracetamol, but of course, in a child's foot, just as in elbow dysplasia, you're masking the problem, not treating the problem. And that brings us to further intervention. And further intervention means, well, shall we give her some new shoes? Would that be the best solution to this problem? Sort the shoes out, right? So this is an illustration of a kind of common fallacy is based on this idea, a wishful thinking concept that you can treat a condition with something which is, just a pill that is a low risk, cheap and easy, and expect to have an unrealistic outcome. So, myself and my specialist colleagues, if you ask us, we're likely to, if we're presented with this child, say she needs some new shoes, and that doesn't mean an elbow replacement, but it does mean something other than supplements. Are you with me?
Yes. I just had a child knocking on the door.
In bare feet, I hope.
Yes, absolutely.
So what I'm going to do now is that this is new information. Some of it's on one of the guides that's up on the YouTube channel. Not currently on the website, but up on the YouTube channel.
Okay.
And this is answering the question: how would specialists address elbow dysplasia? And to sort of set the scene, I'm going to just ask a question of what do specialists think about elbow dysplasia? And if you ask us some questions, and these are the answers that you're likely to get. This is my perspective, and I think it's shared by many. Do we like elbow arthritis?
I'm going to guess absolutely not.
So I'm talking about specialist surgeons here, and so what we see ourselves as, and what people see ourselves as, are problem solvers. We wield a scalpel to offer as close as we can to a cure as possible. And so what we really enjoy would be cruciate disease. Bring us a dog with a cruciate ligament injury, and we can take a dog that we're confident will have long-term debilitating clinical signs without an operation. We do an operation which is pretty low risk, major complication rate for specialist TPLO, for example, 1 in 30, and we'll change that dog's life. And in the long term, we have a pretty high chance of making them so close to normal that they seem like normal.
Yeah.
And we distinguish that from elbow arthritis, which has no cure. And our endeavor as surgeons is that we want to offer an improvement. So our target is to make these dogs much better than they were before they walked into our consult room, and much better in the long term than they would have been had we not intervened. And now that's a very unsatisfying situation to be in. Owners come to me and they're frustrated because I'm not offering them a cure.
Yeah.
And I'm frustrated because they don't understand that I can't offer them a cure. So do we like elbow arthritis? No.
Yeah.
Do specialists want to do an operation? Now, I'll apply this to anything that I do. And when a carer comes into a consult room, this is what I believe happens. If I try and apply a stereotype or read their mind, the average person comes into the consult room, they would like to do everything they can to avoid an operation. If there's a way of making their pet better without doing an operation, that's what they would want to do. Absolutely correct that that's what they would want to do. And now they look across the table at a surgeon in front of them, and they apply the stereotype we just talked about. And they see a person who wants to operate. So what they believe is that they don't want to do an operation, but you're on the other side trying to talk them into an operation. Now,
they're getting a biased opinion then of just because this is what we do.
They don't realize that we've got the same starting point. Neither of us want to operate.
Yeah.
Now, when I qualified in 1997, I said the same oath that we all say, which is that we want to protect dogs and cats and all the animals that we treat from pain and suffering. As soon as I operate an animal, I break my promise. I cause pain and suffering.
Yeah, absolutely.
So every time I do an operation, I break that promise. And so what I need in order to say I want to operate is I need to know that in doing that the long-term benefit is going to vastly outweigh the negatives, the suffering that I've caused in doing an operation. So I'm only going to do an operation if I'm absolutely confident that it's the right thing to do. I'm not going to do it unless I have to, right? That doesn't mean that I'm trigger shy. It means that I will do a thorough risk analysis, and I would rather, if I can get a good result without operating, that's what I'll do.
Yeah.
Do we have reliable published data? Now, I've mentioned a few times our favorite subject is cruciate disease, and one of the reasons it's our favorite subject is that we're way ahead of all the other conditions in terms of the data that we can fall back on. And over the last few decades, in particular the last 20 years, there's been a real change in the tide, so that we have very reliable data telling us what's the best way to manage a dog with a cruciate ligament injury. And now elbow dysplasia is reliably unreliable, and therefore we don't have as good information about how best to treat elbow dysplasia as we do for cruciate ligament disease. So we have published data, it's just not as good.
Yeah. And I mean, cruciate disease has changed hugely, hasn't it? And how specialists will approach it, and the actual techniques.
It's become almost a no-brainer. I don't want to be flippant about cruciate disease, but the last guides I've been putting out are about cruciate disease, and when you look at the evidence, it's really compelling, and it's much more powerful than the evidence we have for the enigmatic condition we're talking about now.
Yeah.
And I'll explain why we have a big problem, and I'll explain it by telling you all what an ideal study should look like. So here we have the puzzle analogy, and so this is a Rubik's Cube, a frustration of my youth.
Everyone's familiar with that. Yeah.
This is how we played. And now, when people think about elbow dysplasia, they often think in kind of one or two dimensions. They think about a dog that has a normal elbow apart from one little corner that has an abnormality, and that's called a fragmented coronoid process or an ununited anchineal process. One way or another, we've got a normal elbow apart from one little area, and that little area is treatable. So what we think is that we remove that, we fragment, and then we end up with a nearly normal Rubik's Cube in this case, just missing one of the cubes.
Yeah.
So if you was to think, well, how would we study this? Pretty easy in people's mind. We take 1,000 dogs that have this particular pattern, and 500 of those dogs get non-surgical treatment, and the other 500 get their fragment removed, and then we follow them up for life. We use owner questionnaires and maybe ground reaction forces and some movement analysis, and we say which works better. And in principle, that sounds like a great idea. And then we look at the opposite end of the spectrum, which is severe elbow dysplasia, where you've got this total mess, and removing one of those puzzle pieces will do nothing for that individual. So we apply the same principle. We have myriad different treatments, or all different types of non-surgical treatment protocols and surgical treatment protocols, and then we ask the same question. Let's divide our dogs up into dogs with severe dysplasia that have different treatments, and we'll follow them for life. But what we don't bank on is the in-between, and the in-between is literally infinite variation of patterns. This a Rubik's Cube is a simple device which has quintillions of different patterns, and so elbow dysplasia is more complex. And so the take-home message here is that there is no two dogs that have the same form of elbow dysplasia. Everyone is completely unique. So if I want to run a study, this is what I would have to do. I'd have to be a surgeon with lots of experience, no bias. I have a carer that comes into my consult room and I say to that carer, here are your options. You don't get to decide which of those options that we exercise, but your dog's still going to get an operation. I do arthroscopy. I look inside the joint. I see a loose fragment and I say, if this was my dog, I'd remove that loose fragment based on 17 years experience, but that's not what we're doing here. I'd say to my colleague, toss the coin. Colleague tosses the coin and they say, sorry, dog, we're going to leave that fragment alone. We leave the fragment alone, but we don't tell the owners because they're not allowed to know. Nobody else in the room is involved in the study anymore. You follow that dog for 6 months. If the dog doesn't do very well, we tell the owner, actually, your dog didn't get, they got a sham.
It just can't be done.
And that study will never happen because it's so what do you do when you can't make the perfect study? And your default then has to be that you have to look at experience. And if you look at experience of one surgeon, for example, me, and you say, well, what would you do with your own dog, which is a perfectly reasonable question. It's a paternalistic model of consulting.
Yeah.
Then you're going to get a view of elbow dysplasia based on my 17 years of experience working in orthopedics. And that means that I'm used to seeing dogs that come in with chronic pain. I treat them with arthroscopy and they improve, and I'll paint you a picture based on my own personal bias. So that's okay because I'm experienced, but it's not ideal. So it's better if you can to collect what's called a consensus of experts rather than a single expert. And that's the way that we get rid of bias. So this is what I did in 2018 with some colleagues, is that we collected a group of 132 board certified specialists from the ECVS. And this is information which nobody knows about. This is brand new. So
wow,
for you from 2018. So collectively, these specialists had 1,267 years working in specialist practice. So we have, even for orthopedics, this is a lot of brain power.
That is a lot, yeah.
And collectively, they are treating 685 dogs with elbow dysplasia for every month that passes.
Wow.
And we gave them some vignettes or case scenarios of 3 typical cases, and we can't give them all the different variations. So we gave them 3 examples.
Okay.
And we asked them, after giving them information about the carers and the carers' values and circumstances, and the patient circumstances, we asked them to say what would be their recommended treatment and what would they tell that carer about the predicted outcome for the treatment that they recommended. Those are the most important 2 questions. And I'm going to give you, just as we wrap up here, 2 of those vignettes.
Okay.
So vignette number 1 is a puppy who's 6-month-old, large breed dog. And as I love Goldies, he's going to be a Goldie.
Right. He's
got an 8-week history of left forelimb lameness. He's been given appropriate non-surgical treatment with rest and medications.
Yeah.
Response has been intermittent and limited, familiar territory. And we examine that individual. We find that there's left elbow discomfort and a mild left-sided forelimb lameness. We give the specialists 2 extra bits of information, which is a radiograph which shows mild elbow dysplasia. So this is that halo shows subtrochlear sclerosis, and we have a CT scan which shows a fragmented medial coronoid process. So this would be your Rubik's cube with the corner that's cracked away.
Yeah.
And then, so we asked them, what would you choose? And surgery is in red.
Yeah.
And medical management is in grey.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting. I would have imagined 100%.
I would have imagined 100%, but we also have to factor in that there are some individuals who maybe don't have as much experience, or maybe have poor experience. I spent my childhood playing with Rubik's Cube and computer games, so as soon as I learned arthroscopy, it felt like a second home to me.
Nice.
And, so it might be that some people just have poor experience of arthroscopy, they want to avoid it. So almost always the surgeons would recommend an operation for this individual, and then we come to the reason why, why would they offer this? This is answered with the next question that we asked them was, what would you expect if you went down path 1 or path 2? So grey here is, what's the predicted chance of, I'll add the word significant long-term improvement? Is it none, a small chance, a moderate chance, a high chance, or a very high chance with non-surgical treatment?
Right, non-surgical. Okay.
So grey here was non-surgical, chosen by 5%. And now the answer is actually given by all 132 surgeons. So they say the vast majority, about 6 out of 10, say that it's a small chance, and the ones that don't say small, more often they'll say it's a moderate chance. So the outlook for non-surgical treatment in this puppy is pretty poor. And if you superimpose then the numbers for surgical treatment, the reason that so many recommended surgical treatment, 95%, is just because their perceived outlook for these puppies is much better.
Yeah.
It's only the minority that think that it will make a small difference. Most of them think a moderate or high chance, or even a very high chance of significant long-term improvement. Notice I didn't say cure. Notice that I say this is, yes, life-changing, but no, not a cure.
And it makes perfect sense, really, doesn't it? Because you're getting, when you are physically removing something that you can see is causing the pain. And it's that one, in most of those cases, initially, it's just that one thing that you need to remove.
Well, this is it. I mean, there are different surgeries, and one of the problems here is, what people call the stone in the shoe, which is a bad analogy because it implies that the rest of the foot is normal, and it's not. And what we have here is a group of surgeons who see the Rubik's Cube with the broken off corner and say, right, well, if I remove that corner, then I will return a dog to, I'm going to have to move because I'm running out of battery.
Oh, no. Oh, is that what that is? I couldn't see what it says.
It says your Mac will sleep soon,
dear.
the audience. Like the audience.
No, we're still getting questions in, but the questions I'm probably going to come back to at a later date and answer them.
Yeah, you're currently you're a mobile vet right now. You're doing a tour. And I'm actually, please don't say you can see me. I'm actually.
No, they can't. I can, but no one else can.
I'm grabbing a charger, and then I'm going downstairs again with my charger and plugging us in. So what we have here is a group of surgeons who recognize that this is a mechanical problem which needs a mechanical solution. The biological consequence is secondary. So medications are intended to treat the biological consequence, not the primary problem. So we're willing as surgeons to do an operation that we don't really want to do because we believe that it's in that patient's long-term interest.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump to the third vignette because it gets a bit muddy when you look at the intermediate kind of cases. So the third vignette is the opposite end of the spectrum. We have an 8-year-old large breed dog who has a 6 months history of right forelimb lameness. For CAM, this is a kind of bread and butter case.
Yes, absolutely.
Given, but the response is minimal with appropriate treatment. And this dog is obviously lame, 5 out of 10 with obvious elbow pain. So we supply a radiograph. Now, a 2014 study was done which looked at the correlation between radiographic change and cartilage pathology, and that study is very different to all the other studies looking at the relationship between X-ray and cartilage disease because it showed a very strong positive correlation. That is that when you've got an elbow which looks like this, the severest X-ray form, almost always, 92% of the time, they've got severe diffuse cartilage pathology. So even without looking in this joint, the surgeons that are given this case scenario have a pretty good idea that this dog's got severe diffuse cartilage pathology.
Yeah.
So then we ask them the same thing, given the owner's values and the dog's clinical problem, what would they recommend? And there's an interesting switch around here. So red here is again surgery, and here we see that it's only about 3 out of 10 that would recommend a surgical course, and the remainder would recommend non-surgical treatment.
And the surgery, do they go specific? Did they say?
Yeah, we did. We broke it down to there's many different operations that exist, and I'm going to give you a rundown of what they predicted in a minute for commonest of the operations. But the way that these operations work is that they're intended to change the way that load goes through the elbow joint, and they're effectively either like giving new shoes, things like PUO and SHO and Paul. They're like changing your shoes, maybe putting a pair of sandals on instead. All the way through to CUE, which is a resurfacing operation, which is like putting a new inner sole in your shoe. All of these are encompassed within this 29% that said they do surgery, and the remainder would go down a non-surgical route, which also has lots of different options. They have medications, injections into the joint, physical therapy, and lifestyle changes, etc. So then you kind of ask the question, well, what is it? Are they going down a different route here because these dogs are just older, and then therefore it's more acceptable to go for palliative care, which would be a reasonable mindset, or is it something else? And it turns out that it's something else, and the something else here is all about risk analysis. So this is sobering data. So grey here is chosen by most, and this is the likelihood of significant long-term improvement with the best available. This is specialist recommended non-surgical treatment.
Non-surgical,
Most people say there's a small chance or no chance of significant long-term improvement.
Wow.
So that significant word is important. So you can make small impacts on these individuals.
There's
nothing life-changing that you have to offer them medically. So then
I'm scared as to what's coming next.
So then we ask the question, what happens when we get our scalpel out instead? Can we be the hero as surgeons? And the answer here is that actually it does shift a little bit, but it only shifts a little bit towards a benefit. And that's the reason that surgeons are giving a different set of recommendations for the puppy compared to a relatively older dog, is because the relative difference between these two groups, non-surgical and surgical, it exists. It's just very much smaller. And I think the analogy that I would give here is that I used the cancer analogy before. If you as a surgeon are presented with a cancer and you catch it early, to use that expression, you've got a pretty good chance of either curing or putting it into remission. But if you wait and wait and wait and wait until that cancer is enormous, and then you say to the surgeon, now have a go, then you're up against the wall. And it's the same with arthritis. We have a much better chance of getting a good outcome if we're given the opportunity to treat it early.
It makes perfect sense. It is quite sobering, isn't it? Because in those situations, you think, well, I'm only going to get a small significant change with medical management. I'm only going to get a small significant change with surgical. And then that points you back to that initial figure of 40% of the
once again, you got to take this information in context. So taking the information in context, what you're saying is that specialists are really proactive about trying to do early active treatment to treat what the problem is, a mechanical problem. Once you get to the elderly dogs, we don't give up on them. We don't say surgery is no good. We just say that the relative benefit we get from that surgery isn't as big as it is when we treat a relatively young dog. Now, does that mean that we stop offering surgery because it's high morbidity? Well, no. I've seen dogs that I've done CUE surgery on, and they've done really well. And we've got plenty of data that says that these dogs can do really well. But you've got a commitment to make here, and that commitment is what we talked about earlier. For every effect, there's an equal and opposite effect. So if you want a profound benefit from something like canine unicompartmental elbow replacement, you have to accept that you've got adverse effects that go with it. It's expensive, the aftercare is difficult, and there's a risk involved. If you expect to have an equivalent improvement by giving a supplement which has no side effects and relatively small cost, then you're setting yourself up for the caregiver placebo effect. It's not a realistic goal.
Yeah. And it also, talking about like treating them earlier, it goes back to also the diagnosis, doesn't it? And how important it is to get a diagnosis.
Yeah, I mean, if we're only getting a diagnosis in a quarter of the dogs with musculoskeletal problems, then instantly we're up against it.
Yeah.
Which brings me nicely to my closing thing. I've got a closing thing. Do you want me to do it?
I didn't realize you had a closing.
No, I made you a closing thing to wrap up. And I can do it or not. Depends on how. Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I'll
go for it. It's not the squirrel.
Well, what we're already talking about, know your enemy. So I said it at the beginning, there's a 5% difference in the likelihood of a dog losing their life to arthritis or cancer. 5% difference. So ask yourself this question. If you went to see a veterinary surgeon with your dog and they made a diagnosis of cancer and offered palliative care, would you say, well, just a second, I want to know my enemy here. I want to know what type of cancer it is. I want to know where it is. I want to know if it's malignant or benign, and I want to know all my surgical and non-surgical options. If the answer to that is yes, that's what I would want, you should treat arthritis with the same respect.
Yes.
They're not that much different. The difference is that we just have this philosophy where people accept going straight to palliative care.
Yeah.
I don't think it is a good strategy. So that's number one, know your enemy. Number two is, understand human nature and chronic pain. So here I've put some information that comes from the Mayo Clinic, which you'll probably know. I mean, it may be a model for what you guys are doing at CAM, but the Mayo Clinic are super famous for being the pioneers of pain control in human healthcare. Now, what the Mayo Clinic have known for a long time, and we all have known for a long time, is the best available painkillers cannot switch off chronic pain. It can't be done. So things like oxycodone and hydrocodone, they can turn the volume down on pain by about 30%. The best we've got for human chronic pain makes a 30% impact when you look at things like WOMAC scores. Pretty small, and that's the best that we've got. So what happens is that we tend to try to address chronic pain like we do acute pain. We kind of embrace acute pain because it gives us an opportunity. I've got a toothache. I take a paracetamol. My toothache goes away. I stop taking paracetamol. I have an operation. I take some opioids. I take some ibuprofen. I have an epidural. I heal after my operation, which is the definition of acute pain. My problem goes away again. Now, chronic pain, by definition, you're not going to heal, right? An elbow dysplasia, it's incurable. You're not going to heal. So what we have
always going to be there, that pain.
We have chronic pain, and we have a community that want to fight the only way they know, which is against acute pain. So what do we do when we see chronic pain? We say, give me some medications, and if they don't work, give me some more medications. If they don't work, I'll take a supplement. If that doesn't work, another medication, please. And if the best that we've got makes a 30% difference, we're not going to succeed. So believe it or not, the first pain rehabilitation center from the Mayo Clinic was opened in 1974, the year I was born.
Oh, really?
Since 1974, the Mayo Clinic has known that this model doesn't work. And what they do with these people who go there is they don't say, oh, you're giving up because you're accepting that painkillers aren't the solution to this problem and that supplements aren't the solution to this problem.
They
say, we're going to teach you to accept a new normal, and we're going to give you all those other tools that are going to help you with your life. For example, I talk about turning down the volume. The other way to escape from loud music is to walk away from it. So what do they do with people with chronic pain? They train them that the pain is in their mind. And if they have philosophies to take their mind away from the pain, focus on something different,
yeah,
then they make a very effective treatment. So you'll be familiar with this scenario: elderly dog, and the carer buys a new puppy. What happens to the elderly dog when they get a new puppy? It changes their life.
yes,
Always they say they got a new lease of life. It's like I
it's
have
in their minds. Yeah,
puppy has changed their life. Why? Now, why should be an easy answer. 1 in 3 people out on the street, adult people, are suffering from chronic pain.
yeah,
With dogs, by the time they get elderly, it's probably close to all of them that have some degree of
yes,
chronic pain. If you
absolutely.
take their mind off it with
Yeah,
something
distract
else,
it. Mm,
change their focus, you change their lives.
yeah,
So I would encourage people to kind of stop pretending that we're dealing with acute pain, i.e., you can stop reading all the questions about all the different medications and how well they work,
yeah,
and
and
teach people how
accept.
to accept a new normal and
Yeah,
manage chronic pain as it should be managed. Which brings me on to, quit searching for game changers. That's what everyone wants.
but you
And
can't, can you? It's always going to be there.
yeah, so if I give a talk like this, and as an orthopedic surgeon, I expect just a ton of question that comes through about the game changer. I
Yeah,
said it at the beginning. If you asked me 5-10 years ago, it would have been Previcox, then Onsior, then Galliprant, then Librela.
yeah.
What
There's
people
always going to be something.
There will always be a game changer which isn't a game changer. I'm not
Yes.
saying that these things don't work. I'm just saying that we have to be realistic about what they can do.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
best that you can offer gives a 30% difference to
yeah.
people. We have to start looking at alternatives.
Definitely.
And now the number one tip, which I thought I should leave you with, is that never trust a single person,
Yeah.
including me.
Or
So
that person on Facebook that tells you to give this.
or the person on Facebook. So if you wanted, so I did this today as an experiment. I ran through multiple different Dr. Google searches where I put in conditions of interest, risk of neutering, different orthopedic problems, different medical problems, and then saw what came up. And you just don't know who to trust.
No.
If you put these 3 words, you can write this down: College of Veterinary. And
Yeah.
you have to know how to spell veterinary. And then you put the thing that you're interested in, it completely changes your search. So,
Really?
yeah. So almost always within the first few, you're going to get a consensus of experts. So here I did just as an experiment, College of Veterinary, elbow dysplasia. And the first thing that comes up is acvs.org, American
Oh,
College of
wow.
Veterinary Surgeons. You're going to get a consensus of experts. You do it with
Yeah.
cruciate disease, you'll get a consensus of expert. Doesn't matter what veterinary thing you're interested in,
As
write
long as you.
College of Veterinary and then
Yeah.
your search, and you'll get a much higher chance of trustworthy information.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, because you're right. You normally would just put in elbow dysplasia, and then I mean you get
Just have those
thousands.
3 words. Yeah.
And the top ones are not going to be these ones that are coming up here. Like
Yeah.
if you just put in elbow dysplasia, these the more reliable resources are going to be
No,
way down
you'll get
because they haven't been hit.
Yeah, you get individuals, people trying to sell you things. You'll get so there are some keywords that you should never trust. I'm just escaping here.
Yeah.
The keywords that you should never trust are things like game changer, breakthrough treatment. As soon as you see these, then you should immediately look to see whether the person who's giving you that information is trying to make money.
Yeah.
If the answer to that is yes, you have to be very, very careful about whether you want to trust that information.
Yeah. No, it's true. And the internet is a really great thing, but it is a challenge, I think, especially because people rely on it for a lot of their information. And I love it when people come into the surgery and they say, so I have checked Google and I think it's probably this. And okay, no, that's okay. But at least you're telling me that, that. And I think they kind of say it tongue in cheek because they kind of know that they shouldn't have done that, but they couldn't help themselves.
I think the reason for me setting up vet lessons was actually because I would love it if people did that. But what I would like them to be able to do would be come in with information that they can trust. That's why it's non-profit. If as soon as I have sponsors, then I introduce bias into the advice that I give people. So I encourage people, go online, get your information, but just be a bit careful about what you believe.
Yeah, definitely.
There's the two most abused words in our profession are science proves or studies show.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we talk a lot about evidence-based medicine, don't we? And but you can find evidence for a lot of things, and that's the problem.
You absolutely can.
If you look at you can find pretty much whatever you want if you look hard enough, and that's the issue. So yes, go back to the studies, where you're saying, what was it, 1,200 years of experience. Those are the kind of studies that we're wanting to look at, rather than a study of one, because you can find them.
And then, of course, if you're a vet watching, or a carer that's watching, keep a lookout for all the databases that you can contribute to. So things like Generation Pup and Dog's Life. So Generation Pup and Dog's Life, they're following animals throughout life to collect data. RVC have, of course, Vet Compass doing the same thing.
Yes.
There are lots of ways that people can take their normal pets and use them to train people what normal looks like.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Everybody's getting much better at that, and it just makes sure you have access to the right stuff. But the vet lesson stuff is brilliant, and I'm going to put the links, and Lynn's already put a link higher up in here as well. I know we do have loads of questions, and what I would do is go through them and try and answer them.
I'll be like a racehorse. I'll just refuse the ones that I don't like.
I mean, I wonder what I can do, Mike. I don't know if this is all right for you, but if I kind of write them all down, and then, or the groups of questions that are kind of covering the same thing, and get your opinion on them.
Right, I'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah, is that okay? And then I can write the answers, or we can do another little session with the questions another time.
Let's see how we go. Write some questions down.
Yeah, shall I do that? And then we can we'll have a look at
Yeah, I'm at your disposal now. I'm in a different place to before, but you can see me.
No, that's fine. What I will do is go through these later on, because I know that it's getting a little bit late now, and I can see that everyone's saying how brilliant it was. Thank you so much. And it has been very thought-provoking, and it certainly changed my outlook on these things. So thank you so much, Mike, for coming this evening, joining us. And yes, we will find a way to answer these questions, I promise, even if we just do another little recorded session and put it online for everyone so we can answer the questions. But yeah, I will let you all go off to your glasses of wine before you go to bed. And we will see you all again soon.
Like they haven't been drinking heavily through the whole thing.
I don't know what people are doing. But thank you, everyone. Thank you for your comments, and I will get back to you, I promise. Have a good week. Bye.
Bye.